Hey, Mark here. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if it is your first time tuning in. I have another Halloween craft. This time I am going to show you how I made this ghost garland. These are made out of felt, there's some twine, there's some strips of fabric. These I sewed, these I did sew on, but I'm going to show you how you can make these with no sewing as well. So if you are a novice crafter or if you don't know how to sew, you can still make this. Yeah, I was really inspired by the Johanna Parker pieces I've been seeing everybody post on YouTube, and I continue to be inspired by the vintage Halloween vibe. Obviously, Johanna Parker is inspired by that as well. So, or those pieces. So I came up with this garland. I have other ideas. This is actually on a little console table that my TV is on in my sunroom. And I want to do some other videos showing how else I'm going to decorate this room for Halloween. So those will be forthcoming, but I thought we would start here. Watch the video, see how I made it, then go out and make your own, or just watch it and enjoy somebody crafting. I know I also really like just watching people make stuff, even if I have no intention of making it. I don't know, I find it relaxing and it's kind of fun and also gives me ideas. So if you don't want to make this, maybe it'll inspire you to make something else. You could obviously make this with, like, you could do little witch hat shapes or black cats or bats. So many different ways you could do it. Come along and I'll show you how I made this. The first thing you're going to want to do is decide on the shape for your ghost and the pattern. This is what I came up with. I did this one first. And I went on Pinterest, looked at some Johanna Parker images, some other vintage ghost images, and kind of came up with something that I liked that mixed the elements of all of the things that I liked about each of those. Yeah, so that's going to be your first step. You could take a screenshot of this. These squares on this form are 1 inch by 1 inch. So you could sort of see that template on there if you wanted. And then I did one that had one arm up and one arm down. And then I did one that had 2 arms up. Now to cut them out, I used a wool blend felt, which I like better than the felt that you're going to find at Michael's. It just has a nicer feel to it. It's thicker. You can see, you can't really see my hand through it. And if you buy white felt like in those craft sheets, you can usually see through it a little bit. That doesn't matter a ton. You could still use those craft sheets you get at Michael's. But I go on Etsy, I search for wool felt. Most of it isn't 100% wool. It's a blend. And I got a yard of it, which is helpful too, that you can buy it by the yard, not just by little sheets. I think it was about $12. And just FYI, when you do get wool felt, this said white, and it is much more of, you can see it next to paper white. So this is more of a warm winter white or almost an ivory, but I think it lends itself really well to the vintage feel that I'm going for with the ghosts. If you want a bright white, you might be better off going to Michael's and getting the craft felt. I'm not sure, or you could ask, in the messages on Etsy, if there was a bright white option or if it was more of like an off-white. And then I cut them out, and you're going to want to cut out 2 of each. You need 2 of them for each one of the ghosts that's going to be in the garland, because you're going to sew or glue these together and stuff them, and then that's going to be your little ghosty guy. So I cut them out. So you're going to cut out 6 of them. They could all be the same shape. I just thought it would be sort of fun to have, 3 different ghosties and string them together. Well, I will say, this was a tip. When I drew out my shape that I wanted, and then the size that I wanted of this, I added another 1/4 inch around it, because when you stitch it and stuff it, you're going to lose some of the size. And this would end up being much skinnier when it's stuffed. So that's something you definitely want to do. Draw it out exactly the size you want it, then add a 1/4 inch around all of it. And that'll help you out. Now for the face,
you have a lot of different options. You could even just use 3 buttons. You could do 2 eyes and a mouth. You could just do a mouth. You could just do eyes. You could embroider the face. You could paint the face with fabric paints. I wanted to use felt. So I actually did use the craft felt for, I believe. And what I did to make it easier to cut out, I fused it with some interfacing, some fusible interfacing to just stiffen it a little bit. Now, my neighbor helped me out, and we used her Cricut to try to cut out the cheeks, and it worked for the cheeks pretty well. The eyes, it was having a little bit of trouble with the felt. We couldn't quite figure out whether it was because of the blade that was in the machine or the fabric itself, or that I put this fusible interfacing on it, because we tried another fabric and it didn't work. So anyway, if you have a Cricut, you could also use that and try it. So I drew out my face first on the pattern itself, and then I traced this again on another sheet of paper and made a pattern and cut them out freehand. The other thing, if you do the fusible webbing on the felt, you can go on the back of it and draw on it with a pen or a pencil a lot easier than you can trying to draw on the felt itself. And then I cut out the eyes freehand. Now, I will give you a tip. To get the little cutout, I actually used a piece from a grommet setting kit that you would use to cut the fabric, and it just made a little hole and pierced it. And that was a lot faster than trying to cut them out, freehand by myself. That's actually also how I did the nose. It's a tiny little piece, so I had one of the little grommet cutter things for the fabric to get the tiny little circle. You don't need that. You could do it freehand. And like I said, you could embroider it. You could use buttons, paint, whatever. But I'm just telling you how I did mine. And then the mouth, I did freehand cut the circle for the mouth. But I did also cut a face out entirely freehand. And you can see that. So that's cute. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's totally cute. And you could do that and leave it at that and not do anything else. So you can do it totally freehand, just with a pair of scissors and some felt. However you decide to do your face, it's going to be a lot easier to put it on the ghost before you sew the 2 pieces together. So I think that looks like a good placement. And I find it easier to put the glue on with a brush. So I have a little paintbrush that is just specifically for glue, because even if you wash it out right away, it pretty much ruins it. So and again, I think you could use Elmer's for this. I have fabric glue, but use what you got. So there are our 3 ghost faces, and not the same ghost face as in the very popular horror franchise. And I want to make this, like I've said before, feel vintage, inspired by Johanna Parker. So I want to add some eyebrows, and this is it disappears with steam or heat. I think it's actually steam that makes it erase, but you can get these in sewing supply stores or online. I'm going to do a little bit there. So I want to do little lines around his face, little eyebrows, and one right under the mouth. So I'm just kind of marking them roughly. And then what I did was I took 3 strands of embroidery floss. I don't use the whole, it comes like this, and it's pretty thick. It's 6 strands, so I separate that into 3. That's pretty standard, I think, for embroidery. And then you put a knot in the end. I use whatever needle you have. And then I'm just going to go through. You're just making straight stitches, so it's not like, did I put a knot in that? Yes, I did. It's not crazy embroidery or anything. You're just making a stitch. And it does give him a lot of personality. And then you just knot the back. I will tell you, if you opt to use the craft felt that you would get at a Michael's, you probably will see any of the threads behind. So clip them as close as possible, because that black thread might show through on a thinner felt. I'm going to do this. I want the middle one to be a little longer. So really simple, but it really gives him a lot of life. So don't be afraid to do the embroidery. I mean, it's very basic embroidery. You're just making a couple straight stitches. So there's his face, and it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. You know, it's supposed to look handmade and vintage. So don't drive yourself crazy. Just have fun with it. And now I want to add some little sort of cross hatches, I guess you'd call them, in the cheeks too, to give it a little bit more dimension. So again, it's just going to be a straight stitch. And since you glued it, or if you did glue these on, you're going to run into a little, sometimes the needle can be a little hard to get through, but it's really not, it's not a big deal. Oh, Emmett just walked in. Hi, buddy. So again, it's just straight stitches, nothing crazy. I just like the way that looks. I think it's cute. So feel free to do or not do any of this that you like. It's your project. Like I said in the Halloween card video, you know, if you like it, then do it. Make your ghost however you want. Cute. So there you go. But there it is. And I had already done the other two. So look how cute their faces are. I love it. The next step is going to be stitching them together, both sides, both front and back. But before we do that, we're going to take the back to all of them, and we're going to cut a slit in the center. And this is what we're going to use to stuff them. This is going to make it easier to stuff and stitch them together, because we're going to stitch all the way around them with our sewing machine and not have to leave an opening and then stuff it. Because if you stuff it and you have an opening left and you stuff it pretty full, it's hard to squeeze that together and sew that again and have it match the rest of the stitching that's going to be all around it. So that's why I'm going to do it this way. And then I'll just whip stitch this back closed. You don't have to have a machine. You don't have to have a machine to sew these together. You can whip stitch them by hand or even hot glue. And I did hot glue one to show what that would look like. Okay, I pinned the front and the back together a little bit. That looks terrifying. Just in a few places. I set my sewing machine to a zigzag stitch, and we're going to zigzag stitch all along the edge here. And so I just want to keep that zigzag stitch as close to the edge as possible. I can show you here. I kind of want that outer sweep to be right along the edge of the fabric, or just right inside of it, not, you know, really far in. So now you've got your ghosts sewn together. You can see along the edge there. And let me show you what it would look like. This is one that I hot glued together. So it looks pretty much the same. You're just not going to have that stitching around the edge. And I like the stitching, but you might not. You might prefer this. So this is all glue. There's no sewing on this one. And then we're going to stuff this. So this is where that is going to come in handy, where we cut on the back, because it just lets us be able to get into all of the spaces. Whereas if you left an opening down here, it would be hard to stuff up in the head. If you left an opening on the arm, it'd be hard to get down to the little tail. So I just find this easier. I have this little, I don't even know what this is for, what it was made for, to be honest with you, but I use that to push stuffing into the little parts. And you can make it as full or as soft as you want. I like it to be fairly stuffed, fairly densely. So that's my preference. And you just use small bits. You don't have to go too small because this is pretty large, but this just helps to. If you don't have this, you could use a chopstick or anything that has a blunt end to it would work. Even a popsicle stick could be helpful. Okay, let me show you what it looks like when they're all stuffed. So you can see they're pretty dense, pretty thick, but I like them. I like that look. I think it looks really cool. And then I just whip stitched the back closed. You're never going to see that when you hang it up. You can use these as ornaments too if you want to put them on a Halloween tree. Stitch or glue a little loop of ribbon to the back, or just nestle them in your tree. So that is what they look like stuffed. I'm going to show you. I'm going to finish stuffing this one and then show you how to whip stitch the opening closed. So I have my needle threaded and double threaded, doubled, knotted, and then not double threaded, but pulled. The thread is doubled and then knotted. And it's finished. I finished stuffing it, and I'm going to go in here. And then I like to, because if you pull it, you're going to pull that knot right through. So I go through both needles through both threads, through the loop of the thread to secure it. You're just going along the edge and then pulling it as you go. So it's making a little, you're just pulling them closed. This is super easy. If you want to sew the ghosts together like this, you totally can. Just, butt the two ends together. And it would be more like, you'd be sewing it more like that, where it wouldn't be an opening. But it's actually easier to do it that way. And just try to keep your stitches even. But that would be a totally acceptable way to stitch the front and back pieces together as well. You could also glue this opening closed if you opted for the hot glue option. Clip it, and there you are. And now we have all three of our ghosts stuffed and ready to go. I want to do little collars around the ghosts, little ruffle collars. So I'm going to cut strips of fabric. This was Halloween fabric I had left over from my making miniature vintage Halloween costume video. And so I'm going to do a 2.5-inch strip. I'm going to cut a couple of those. I'm going to take my pinking shears and I want to do a little pinked edge so they get that nice vintagey sawtooth rickrack kind of feel to it. So I took my 2.5-inch wide strip. Did I say it was 2.5 or 2? Anyway, it's 2.5 inches wide. Use the pinking shears to cut each long edge, and then I'm folding it in half lengthwise, and then I'm running a running stitch to gather it. So what that looks like is just about a 1/4 inch apart. You're just sort of running a stitch through. And then you can see here, it wasn't quite long enough, so I just kept going with it. I just overlapped it and kept going. I didn't worry about sewing these together because once it's all gathered, you're not going to notice that anyway. So then you're just going to keep running this. And then however long you need to make these, it depends on how full you want your ruffle. I wanted mine to be almost like an Elizabethan collar, like with the pleats. So you can see I'm just, and what that looks like if I wasn't gathering it as I went, is just like that. You're just doing that. See, it's not perfect at all, but you're just doing that along the whole length of it, and then you're going to gather it. Okay, so I ran the stitch all the way through, and then I'm just going to pull, and then you see how it kind of makes these little pleats. And then you can adjust those however you want. And then that is going to go around the ghost's little neck like that. Oh my gosh. And then you can just stitch them. Just take a couple stitches in the back to secure it, you know, if you want. Or you could just glue it on them too, if you would rather. Well, I'll just roll them with a lint brush after. But, you know, that might be a good way to get over your fear of a needle and thread, is just doing something really simple like that. Just gathering it, because you can't really mess it up. I mean, you could if you really tried, but you would really have to try if you wanted to mess it up. That, okay, come on, right? All right, so I have all of my 3 ghosts done. I did the collars, I did 2 black ones, and then the pink one, because I had more of the black fabric than I had the pink fabric. So that was the determining factor there. And then I had these little pearlized buttons that I pulled out and I sewed on them, and I thought they looked kind of cute and ghosty and vintage. I'm going to take some twine. If you don't have a spool of twine, you should get one. It comes in really handy for all kind of decorations. I wonder if they have this at the dollar store. Does somebody know if they carry this at the dollar store? Comment down below if so. And I'm just going to put out, I don't know how much. I don't know. I'm just going to cut a big, long piece of twine. How are we going to do this? Are we going to hang them by their heads, I think? Probably. That makes the most sense. So that's about the center. And then, again, you could sew or glue this. I think I'm going to glue, because I think I'm going to sew it. Oh, that is my oatmeal. If you hear that timer, my oatmeal's ready. So I just tested it to see how it was hanging. How's it hanging, Ghost? And I didn't like how it was hanging when it was sewn at the neck there. So we're going to stitch it up at the top so they just hang down. And I think I'll be happier with that result. I don't want them too far apart, but I don't want them too close together. So that's the tricky part, I think. What is that? Maybe I'm measuring off camera here. Okay, that's about 10 inches apart. I think that's pretty good. Ta-da-da. Trying to stay on camera. All right, and there is my strung up ghosts. Now that I have my ghosts done, I want to cut some strips that will be make up the rest of the garland. That will fill in the space on the twine between the ghosts. So just cutting some strips of fabric about 1 inch wide. You could also just tear it if you want it to be rustic. Like this fabric here, this kind of satiny. I think I'm just going to tear this. Not all fabric will do that nicely, but cotton will for sure. So you don't need to get pinking shears if you don't have them. So we have these strips, and then you can kind of clean off the edges a little bit. So that'll just be a different texture and different little sheen in there. So I think that'll be nice. I don't think I need a ton of that. I cut up some strips of this netting fabric that I had that had polka dots on it, because I thought that would be a really cool texture to put in there with and make it a little gauzy and ghosty. I cut up the rest of the cotton that I had, and I have the little bit of satin. So I have my pile of strips of fabric, and I'm just going to keep building until I think there's enough of them there with enough different textures. But this is a good way to use up random fabric scraps that you have, because you could, I'm keeping this all pink and black, but you could do obviously black and orange, or you know, whatever color scheme you wanted, whatever kind of fabrics you had. I think the tulle ones are like this netting is my favorite. It adds a lot to it, actually. If you cut your strips and then put them through the washing machine, they would get a really nice fray going on. Even with the pinked edges, that would give like a really nice texture to it. So, or washing, it's more the dryer that does it, to be honest with you. So if you do use cotton, I would recommend washing it and drying it, because it does make it a little bit softer, remove some of the sizing and things in it that keep it really crisp, which you'd want for some projects, but for this, I think the softer fabric works better. And I wanted to give you a close-up view of it strung up here. And I still need to put pictures in that picture frame. So hold me accountable. The next time I show what I do in this room, I should have pictures in it. And if not, call me out in the comments. But there it is, all hung up and on display, and the first layer of decorating in this room. So thank you for watching this video, and let me know if you are planning on making this or some variation of it in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and maybe you want to watch this other video here and see what else I've got going on the channel. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye.